because while the church was quarantined, all this stuff on Black Lives Matters, critical race theory, that movement was really growing. And I think we're going to be shocked when the doors open up of how many churches are dying, how many people left the church, and then the debris that's left over of this worldview clash. And so hearing you talk about how we got to communicate, I mean, we just need some good people skills to navigate this. I mean, you and I were talking before the break, and I was saying, Monique, it drives me crazy watching these conventions the last 2 weeks. You've got the Democratic convention. They can't mention anything about the riots going on. And then you get the Republican convention, and you're not hearing anything about Jacob Blake's shooting. And I'm going, there are things that we can acknowledge on both sides where we can kind of slow down some of the vitriolic language, but we kind of have this incendiary approach to things that's creating more antics and frustration. And I just wish that we could do a little bit more conceding, a little bit more slowing down, a little bit more listening. Why is it so hard for us to listen right now?
Honestly, if I'm completely honest, I think we both sides want to be right. You know, and one side has their definition of what justice is and what it should look like. The other side has their definition of what justice is and what it should look like. And I see far too few people actually going to scripture and saying, this is what justice is. And I'm going to hold to a biblical definition of justice. And so instead of holding to my political lines or the party lines, I'm going to stand for truth. I'm going to stand for scripture and say that this is unjust and this is unjust. And both sides, if we're looking politically, participate in injustice. Nobody wants to, in my personal opinion, shift too far from their party lines. I personally don't want to hold to, I don't want my organization to hold to being political, because I want to be able to hold to scripture. Mm-hmm. And if this party is doing something that is unjust, I need to be able to call it out. We have to be able to lead by example and say, this is an injustice. And yes, I might, like the majority of what this party does, but this is still an injustice. And this over here is also an injustice. But it's again coming back to our terms. How are we defining injustice? When I upheld critical race theory or social justice, there were many things that I upheld and I would call it completely just. This is justice. It's justice to fight for a woman's right to choose. All we have is choice. And this is how I held this frame, or this frame of mind, by saying, like, using the scripture of, that God says, I put before you life and death. Like, you have to choose. As a human, you are responsible for your own choice. And then I would say, okay, so I'm going to take that scripture and apply that to things like abortion. People need to be able to choose. It's her body. And so if that's the case, this is a justice issue. Again, there's a conflation there, and we are not accurately defining our terms. What does scripture say is just, and what does scripture say is unjust? And we need to hold to that. So if someone is shot by a police officer and it is unjust, we need to be able to say, hey, look, this is an injustice. And if a person is rioting and breaking into stores, we need to say, hey, this is injustice.